Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So after last night's Game 7, the 2023-2024 season has come to an end. And funny enough, Game 7 on a Monday, so now we got a tier list Tuesday. So I thought it would be a nice way to kind of wrap a bow on the season to do a tier list. And tier list every single team season based on their preseason expectations, mid-season expectations, as well as the overall goals that they wanted to achieve throughout the season. Not every team had the same goals. For example, Chicago Blackhawks, San Jose Sharks, their goal was kind of to suck, so it wasn't. It's going to be different for every single team. Their overall objectives. It's not just going to be a regurgitation of the standings and who went the deepest in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So, without further ado, let's get into it and kind of wrap up the 2023-2024 season before I go nuclear with the draft and free agency, and then God knows what the hell I'm going to do during the offseason. Just absolute nonsense. But let's get into it. Pretty straightforward. Great, good, solid, meh, disaster. Up first for the Anaheim Ducks. I think they're somewhere between meh and solid. A lot of their young guys did show some promise. I think I'm going to go with solid. They definitely wanted to be better in terms of the standings, but the fact that Carlson, when he was healthy, had a very solid first year. Pavel Mintyukov looked very good. Mason McTavish took another step. I think if you're an Anaheim Ducks fan, you're definitely not elated at the season, considering what did they finish with, like 59 points or something bad like that. But still, a solid season. Their young guys showed some promise. Lucas Dostal as well. Boston Bruins, great in my opinion. Coming into the season, nobody thought they were going to completely fall off, but there was serious discussion that they'd either be a wild card team or just barely miss the playoffs. So the fact that they posted 109 points and also yet again beat the Toronto Maple Leafs. So even though they only made the second round, I mean, they did lose the eventual Stanley Cup champions. I think this overall was a great season for the Boston Bruins. Not too encouraging after the Linus Ullmark trade, but they still have a lot of money to improve this summer, and it's going to be very interesting to watch. Buffalo Sabres, I think I'm going to go disaster, man. Coming off a season where they missed the playoffs by, 2 points? They finished in the low 80s this season. Just unacceptable, picking 11th overall. They don't even have that high of a selection. This year was kind of just an absolute wash for the Buffalo Sabres. Guys like Tage Thompson, Alex Tuch, Jeff Skinner especially, really took step backs. Dylan Cousins had a step back. Rasmus Dahlin, although he's still a stud, don't get me wrong, his offensive production dropped off a decent amount. Very unfortunate. The only kind of bright light from this season is UPL was fantastic for them down the stretch. But overall, kind of a disaster. Calgary Flames, this is a weird one because to start the season, you could make an argument that Calgary maybe would make the playoffs. Last year, they only missed by a couple points, but their expectations and goals changed so much throughout the season. By the time they traded Zadorov, we kind of all admitted they got to sell. They got to sell hard. They did. They got pretty solid packages, all things considered. So I think it was a good season for the Calgary Flames. They finally have an actual direction compared to just being this completely middle of the pack team that they were last year. Craig Conroy finally identified it, sold pretty heavily. They have two, if you count the Markstrom deal that they just recently made, but they have 2 first-round picks in each of the next 3 drafts. It's looking pretty bright. Carolina Hurricanes, meh. They were expected to be a top-tier contender this season, got off to a pretty brutal start, ended up safely making the playoffs, but the fact that they go down 3-0 to the New York Rangers and end up getting eliminated in the second round after making the Eastern Conference Finals last year, after getting Jake Guentzel, Evgeny Kuznetsov at that deadline, this might be the best shot that they have. This might be the most talented roster that they're going to have for a couple years at this point, unless some of their prospects really hit. Chicago Blackhawks, you can make an argument for great. I'm not going to lie, you can make an argument for great. It's tough. When looking at it, what was the goals for this season? It was, is Connor Bedard a superstar and also still get a very high pick? And I think they knocked both out of the park, in my opinion. So I'm going to go with great. I know that they were a horrible team. What did they finish with? 52 points. But when looking at their objectives, also Korchinski, Vlasic really showed something that's very encouraging going forward. So I'm going to say it was a great season for the Chicago Blackhawks, given their expectations and given their freaking goals. And don't be commenting dumb shit about this. Colorado Avalanche, I mean, when you factor in the Valeri Nichushkin had to leave the goddamn team middle of the series versus Dallas, I think I'm going to go with solid. I don't think people had that high of expectations for them coming into the season. Actually, now that I think about it, I picked them to win the Stanley Cup. But once they really showed that some of their offseason moves kind of flopped, it was, I'm going to move them down. It's a meh. It's a meh. They lost in the second round to Dallas, to an in-division team. Columbus, disaster in my opinion when looking at it. Mike Babcock stuff before the season even starts. Pascal Vincent is playing like Adam Fantilli on the fourth line. David Jiricek should be playing in the NHL, should be playing in the NHL, playing in the AHL. Kent Johnson gets set down. Just an absolute shit show. The one shining light is Fantilli was still very good when he did play, like actual minutes, but also Dmitry Vornikov was very impressive. But besides that, a very disappointing season for the Columbus Blue Jackets. Dallas Stars, Good. I mean, they yet again lost in the Western Conference Finals in 6 games, but you saw emergences from Thomas Harley, Logan Stankoven, Wyatt Johnston took another step. So I still think that this is a pretty encouraging season for the Dallas Stars. Can't say it's great considering they didn't make a Stanley Cup final and lost in the exact same number of games in the Western Conference Finals, but there's a lot of things to like with this Dallas Stars team going, no shit, there's a lot of things to like. They're going to be a perennial contender for the next 3 to 4 years. Detroit Red Wings, I'm going to go with good. I was kind of low on this team coming into the season. When looking at it, they were literally in the playoff race till the final days. Got some valuable experience. Lucas Raymond took that step that looks like he's going to be an elite, maybe even superstar level player. Very encouraging for the Detroit Red Wings, even though they kind of collapsed at the end. I still think this was a good season, especially when you compare it to Buffalo or another Atlantic Division team that we thought might take that another step that didn't. Detroit actually did take a pretty sizable step this season, and they didn't even go aggressive at the deadline or do anything ridiculous like that. They got a lot of valuable experience this season. Edmonton Oilers, you got to go with great. They got off to a rough start, but beyond that, final, 65 games of the season, they were the best team in the entire NHL, and then in the playoffs, make the Stanley Cup final. Yes, it sucks to lose in 7 games. Yes, you cannot play. You got to win one of those first 3 games, and you probably win the goddamn Stanley Cup. But when looking at it, I think it's a very successful season for the Edmonton Oilers. They know what their problems are. Cody Ceci, Darnell Nurse, Evander Kane, Jack Campbell. 2 or 3 of those guys got to end up getting traded, and if that is, I see no reason why the Edmonton Oilers can't be back in the Stanley Cup final like the Florida Panthers went back-to-back next year. Florida Panthers, it's conveniently right after, obviously great, won the Stanley Cup. And they even smashed expectations. I don't think anybody had them, and not a ton of people had them winning the division and getting back to the Stanley Cup final, but they ended up doing it. Fantastic job by them. LA Kings, made the playoffs, but I was somewhat high on them during the regular season. Coming into it, I thought they were going to be 103, 104 point team. Actually, they did finish in a divisional spot, but really not that impressive throughout the season. Very hot, very cold at times, and then end up getting whooped by Edmonton in 5 games. Pretty disappointing. Nashville Predators, I'm going to go with great. Screw it. When looking at it, nobody had expectations for this team. Mid to low 80-point team among most. End up finishing with, 99 or 100 points. Put up a pretty decent fight against the Vancouver Canucks. It's going to be interesting to see how they go about it this summer. I still think they need some high-end prospects, some high-end picks, but the team is very competitive right now. Going to be very interesting. Minnesota Wild, I'm going to go disaster, man. I know that they have, $12, $14 million tied up in dead cap to Ryan Suter and Zach Parise, but they had that, I believe, last year and safely made the playoffs. So in looking at it, for them to fall off so much, for a team like Nashville, that I still think Minnesota is as talented as the Nashville Predators, for them to miss the playoffs by 12 points, it wasn't even remotely close, is just simply unacceptable, and I think it kind of was a disaster when looking at their goalie tandem kind of shat the bed early on, and they were never really able to recover from that. It's kind of a disaster season. Montreal, very solid season. Some upsides, some downsides. When looking at it, about where we wanted them to finish in terms of mid to high 70 points. Slavkovsky took a massive step. Cole Caulfield maybe didn't have the goal-scoring season that you kind of expected. But again, positives, negatives. Overall, a pretty solid season for the Montreal Canadiens. Ended up remaining at the 5th overall selection. So, pretty solid season. New Jersey, disaster. No shit here. They had expectations literally to win the goddamn Stanley Cup. That was not the case. Didn't even make the playoffs. Weren't even in it the final week or two. Imagine telling someone that the Washington Capitals and Philadelphia Flyers would be in the playoff race down the stretch, but the New Jersey Devils would not. Massive, massive failure for the Devils. My New York Islanders, solid. I've kept on saying this. Expectations were to get into the playoffs, be around the wild card team. That's exactly what they did. They lost in 5 games, which is unfortunate. But at the end of the day, this team is okay. I think if they make some tweaks, they could actually maybe not be a high contender, but maybe go on a run akin to 2020 or 2021, get a legit top 6 forward, maybe move a bad contract out. And with the New York Islanders, there's definitely some positives. Noah Dobson was fantastic for the first 3 quarters of the season, as well as Bo Horvat proving that he is worth $8.5 million. Solid season for my New York Islanders, and I actually have some optimism going into the offseason, believe it or not. New York Rangers, good, man. Looking into it, their preseason expectations, they were expected to make the playoffs, don't get me wrong, but a lot of people had the Carolina Hurricanes or New Jersey Devils ahead of them in the Metro Division, but obviously the expectations kind of changed once they were in the lead for the President's Trophy to start the season. But when looking at it, they definitely exceeded preseason expectations. Midseason expectations were kind of cup or bust, but overall, for them to make it back to the Eastern Conference Finals, it's a good season for the New York Rangers. Ottawa Senators, utter disaster. They bring in a guy like Jonas Corposalo, absolutely shits the bed, and not to mention Cam Talbot balled out. It was very good for the LA Kings for the start of the season and just overall. So in looking at it for the Ottawa Senators, not good. They literally took a step back this season, 86 points last year. This year had like high 70s. Unacceptable, but at least they got their goaltender. I'm not counting the Linus Ullmark deal in this trade in this deal. Not doing that. Philadelphia Flyers, good. When looking at it, they did kind of collapse towards the end of the season, and it's unfortunate because now they have the 12th pick. Like, you didn't make the playoffs, and now you don't have that high of a draft selection. But overall, a lot of their pieces showed that they're going to be high-impact NHL-level guys. Guys like Cam York, Joel Farabee, very impressed. Now that Matvei Michkov's coming over, maybe they will be a legit playoff team next season under Torts. Goaltending tandem does scare me a little bit, but Sam Ersson did impress me, at least for the start of the season. Solid season, good season by the Philadelphia Flyers. Pittsburgh Penguins, I gotta shrink this. Pittsburgh Penguins are without a doubt, whoops, give me a second. Pittsburgh Penguins are without a doubt a massive disaster, massive failure. Go all in with the Erik Karlsson trade and you end up missing the playoffs. Unacceptable. Yes, Crosby went on a fantastic run towards the end of the season, but at the end of the day, they still missed it. San Jose Sharks, I'm going to go with great, man. Similarly to the Chicago Blackhawks, but even better when you consider the fact that they got the first overall pick. They were the worst team in hockey. They moved some pieces out. Tomas Hertl, you get a first-round pick and a 2023 first-round pick in David Enstrom. It was a masterful tank job. They signed a guy like, why am I blanking on his name? Colin Graff out of Quinnipiac, the top college free agent. It was a very, very good season by the San Jose Sharks, given their expectations and given their overall goals. Seattle Kraken, I'm going to go with meh. I mean, I was lower on this team coming into the season. I thought the writing was on the wall considering how much they outperformed their expected goals last season. But yeah, I saw this coming. I didn't expect them to be close to a 100-point team. Definitely still meh considering they were like an 80-ish point team. But when looking at them, Joey Daccord was a pretty massive positive for them. But also Matty Beniers has actually regressed this season. Just a very mess season by the Seattle Kraken. I wouldn't say it was a disaster, but it's not like they made some insanely aggressive move where people were extremely high in this core. It's a meh. It's perfectly a meh. St. Louis Blues, I'm going to go solid. Yes, they were the 17th best team in the entire NHL, the best non-playoff team. I'm just very mixed on this team right now because I think they're like perfectly average, but they don't have the actual prospect pool to get over the hump eventually down the line. Jordan Binnington played fantastic. Maybe they can end up trading him. Joel Hofer showed some life, but overall, I'm going to say it was a solid season by the St. Louis Blues. Tampa Bay Lightning, meh. I mean, again, I don't think anybody had this team making it back to even in Eastern Conference Finals this season. They're just slowly on the decline. So when looking at it, made the playoffs, but did lose to just a straight up better Florida Panthers team. Perfectly meh. They couldn't really do anything at the deadline. Toronto Maple Leafs, I'm going to go meh as well. Make the playoffs, lose to the Boston Bruins, safely make the playoffs. It's not another disaster because they did make the playoffs. They made it in a divisional spot, but it just doesn't inspire that much confidence. Vancouver Canucks, great season when looking at it, entering it. I had them, I forget, I either had them the 8 seed or the 9 seed in the West. I think I just had them barely missing, but still, I thought I was high on them then, but still, they far outseeded expectations, winning the Pacific Division, winning a round against the Nashville Predators, taking the Edmonton Oilers to 7 games, despite not having Thatcher Demko. Basically every single player on the goddamn team had a career season outside of Elias Pettersson. A great season for the Vancouver Canucks. Vegas Golden Knights, similarly to like Tampa or Toronto or even in LA, made the playoffs. The deadline was so aggressive. I could understand if you had them in disaster, but the deadline wasn't rentals. They re-signed Noah Hanifin. Tomas Hertl is there for the next couple of years at only like $6.7 million. So I'm not going to say it's a disaster. It's not like all these guys are just going to be gone out of nowhere. And they did take Dallas to 7 games. Washington Capitals, good season. You can maybe say great, but I mean, they did get swept. It's not like they like really ever had a chance at contending in the Eastern Conference, but still they showed some life. A lot of their young pieces like Alexei Protas, Connor McMichael really took some steps this season. They're going to need to tank after Ovechkin gets the goal record to get some superstar pieces, but I like their complementary pieces that they're building right now in terms of that, as well as Ryan Leonard could be a star. Arizona Coyotes, I'm only going off what happened on the ice. I'm not factoring in the fact that this logo is defunct, but when looking at it on the ice, I think I'm going to go solid for the Arizona Coyotes. They did have a bit of a collapse towards the end of the season. They had that 14 game losing streak. But still, a lot of their young guys looked very good. Logan Cooley looked very good. Dylan Gunther had 35 points in 45 games. Josh Doan looked fantastic when he came up. Sean Dursey really established himself as a top pairing defenseman. There were a lot of good things, but at the end of the day, you did kind of expect them to take another step into the 80s-ish points. Next year, they really need to do that under a new name, under a new franchise, under a new city. But overall, I'd say it's a solid season by the Arizona Coyotes. And then lastly, for the Winnipeg Jets, regular season, I'd have them in great, maybe even good. But I think that playoffs just leaves such a sour taste, if you go what I'm saying. The fact that they got dogged by the Colorado Avalanche in the last 4 games, it kind of leaves you a little bit hopeless going forward for the Winnipeg Jets. They need to do some pretty massive moves, but they also might lose Rooker McGrody and Nikolai Ehlers. So in looking at it, I think it was a perfectly solid season by the Winnipeg Jets, but I would understand if you put them in good. But yeah, let me know in the comments. What do you think about this? Yeah, Tampa, Seattle, New Jersey. Here it is. We're going to be diving into off-season content now. So get ready for draft, free agency, trades, all that good stuff. And I'll be seeing you in the next one.